programmer, jack of all trades, master of none with all of that. But as well as that, probably the thing I'm most proud of is the book that I wrote with about Sierra. Hang on, I've got a copy of it here because it's never afraid of a free plug. The Sierra Adventure. Aha, 2 free plugs. That's the hardback. Yeah,
That's a
so the
plug
Sierra
to the
Adventures,
second
which is the
power.
story of Sierra.
Hmm.
Yes,
Awesome.
yes. So that's the story of Sierra Online. So I interviewed there's over 50 interviews of various people from Ken Williams down to people who worked in packaging and shipping, just telling the story of what I is my favorite company when it comes to adventure games or games in general, I suppose. So yeah, that's the short version of who I am.
So you said you're the co-founder of Infamous Quest.
Yes.
So what games have you put out?
So Quest for Infamy, which
Hmm.
was it basically started off as a parody of Quest for Glory.
Sure.
The only thing that sort of kept was the name, but we ended up moving it to an original world so we wouldn't get sued and we could sell it and all those sorts of wonderful legal things. But yeah, so Quest for Infamy is probably it's that same sort of hybrid sort of game of RPG, very light on the RPG stuff, but
Hmm.
adventure game. And Order of the Thorn, which is basically a King's Quest knockoff, if I'm to be perfectly honest. It's been released long enough now, I can say that. Yeah, which is, just sort of that sort of family-friendly fantasy sort of game. So, yeah, they're the 2 games we've got out. We also, prior to that, actually, we did some freeware stuff, which were remakes of King's Quest 3 and Space Quest 2,
Hmm.
plus a couple of other little things. So that was most exciting. I loved working on those games, and that gave us the courage, I guess, the boldness to go ahead and think that we knew what we were talking about in designing our own. So,
And I say you folks do know what you're doing or did know what you're doing and certainly hope that you continue to make more games in the future. I know you mentioned Steve Alexander earlier. He's working on Colossal Cave currently. Is that correct?
he is the
Hmm.
absolute lucky fella. As we talk all the time,
Yeah,
and every time I open the message, it usually starts with either an in joke, as you do, or
sure.
it starts with "How is it working for Sierra?" Your childhood dream, which is mine as well. So I think he's getting to work with Ken and Roberta on that level that he is running there, or I think he's running their QA for the new game.
Hmm.
That's just blows my mind. I'm pretty sure it blows his too. Don't want to speak for him, but it's it's pretty cool. to, I think it would be pretty cool to wake up in the morning and well, first thing today, get the kids off to school, and now I'm going to go and talk to Ken Williams about the game. You know,
So did you guys arm wrestle for that job?
No, actually, he just told me that he got it. I was sort of busy doing my things in life, and he's busy doing his. And he's just, guess what? Ken reached out. Someone had recommended me, and I'm like, dude, go for it. That's the most awesome thing ever. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So, do you have any plans to make another game in the future? We got some fans of yours inside the chat on YouTube saying
Oh
that
yeah.
Quest from Infamy was good, and this is going to be a fantastic discussion. So,
Yeah. Look, Quest for Infamy, I love that game. That's
mhm.
that sort of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into that. So, there's so much of my heart and soul, and Steve's and the rest of the team that went into that game. One of those ideas that, um, okay, so Bon Jovi has this great quote that the first album that you release as a band has taken you probably 10 years. You've been thinking about it, you've been working on it, you've been developing it. The second album's usually crap because you've had to, the first album's been such a success,
Hmm.
so you've then got 3 months to get the next one out. So, and I think there's a bit of that with Order of the Thorn, but yeah, going forward, we'd love to do Quest for Infamy 2. We're working on a prequel, Rowan to Ruin, bit of a tongue twister, for Quest for Infamy at the moment. It's nearly done. It's been nearly done for years, but it's sort of a bit of a side hustle for us now. So
Well,
Just get to it when we can. So yeah,
so the game has been successful. You have
yeah,
a book again that has been successful. You're telling me before we start that
yes,
you keep getting these checks coming in
I
every single month, man.
I
Jealous.
do. I do. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the tail on the book. People keep finding it. I keep getting Twitter
Mm-hmm.
messages saying, "Hey, look, just found your book," or someone says, "I found the book," and they post a photo and say, "Great read," which I'm so happy about.
Mm-hmm.
And someone's like, "Oh, I've never heard of it. Where do I buy it?" And I jump into those conversations there and say, "Send me your money," and buy a copy. So, yeah, no, it's great. It's honestly one of the greatest things I've done in my life. That book, just the privilege of speaking to some of those people. I mean, I wrote this book for one reason. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to read this book, and nobody had written it. And I thought, I've spent, I don't know, 50, $60,000 on this journalism degree that I never use. So maybe I can do something out of that now. I'm nowhere near paying that off, but it's yeah, basically I just wanted to read it. I wanted to find out the inside story, not just these rumors and innuendos that you hear, or everything's always whenever people talk about Sierra, they talk about that last year where
Mm-hmm.
everything went belly up and they closed, Black Friday, all of that sort of stuff. Chainsaw Monday, I think Scott Murphy called it. So, um, all the sad stuff. But I'm like, no, come on, these guys did everything. They basically not just adventure games. They
They lived a
they're at the
life.
forefront of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, they and not only adventure games, but they had their hands in all sorts of different types of games. Literally, he had an
yeah,
opportunity
yeah.
to have Doom and pass that up.
Oh,
So,
look, honest. Okay, so after the first couple of interviews, you'd be aware of this. You do the podcast with,
mm-hmm.
famous people, right? And or people that you've looked up to, childhood
Sure.
heroes. After the first couple, you get over that sort of awe,
Mm-hmm.
and it's there in the back of your mind, but
Yeah.
you get over it and you just talk. The one that I could not do that with was John Romero. I am just the biggest Doom fan on the planet. I just absolutely love that game. I've got it on every device that it's legally available on and more. Wolfenstein, Quake, all of it, love it all. So when I'm talking
Spear
to
of
John,
Destiny. Yeah.
I'm just like, this is like, I'm physically trying not to fanboy out on him and just absolutely spaz out. It's just, it was just amazing. And to hear that story from his mouth, which was one of those ones that had floated around, but you're never sure whether it's true or not. So to get him say, yeah, absolutely. And Ken's like, nah, just a Ken Williams, very much Ken, worked on his gut instinct. He's like, nah,
Family. This
I
is a
don't,
family site or a
yeah,
family business. So
yeah,
we have Grundislav Games is saying that
yeah,
it's a great book. Truly enjoyed it. That's Francisco Gonzalez.
yeah,
He's a game developer. He's in the chat right
he
now.
is. Yes,
Um, I,
fantastic.
we're going to talk about what a lot of people allude to as the death of adventure games in the golden age, the
Awesome.
late '90s, or did it die? We're going to talk a
Mm.
little bit about that, but before we get there, going back to the book a little bit, what what's that, Shawn? What's that? You have to tell me what that
Yeah,
is.
it's a bell.
I call your bluff, kind sir. What
Uh,
is it?
look, it's a bell. I'm sure it's a bell. You'd
Ah,
have to talk to Bruce, who drew that cover for me. I didn't even pick it up until it was in print, to be honest. That it looked a little more phallic than that.
that's the Leisure
But
Suit Larry talking in the book right there.
yes, it possibly.
So you talked about
I can
fanboying.
I confirm nor deny.
You talked about fanboying with John Romero. Like I talked
Yeah.
to, I have up until last week, I had talked to every developer that I loved growing up outside of Scott Murphy, but
Yep.
I hadn't talked to I hadn't talked to oh my goodness Ron Gilbert.
Ah,
I
yes.
was
Okay.
so nervous. I couldn't speak like the other day.
Yep.
I couldn't even come
Yep.
up, and I was like, you guys are all just going to have to take over because
Yeah. Yep.
that was literally my father growing up,
Mm.
one of those type of things. And
Oh,
my
the
goodness,
king is in the room. Yeah.
my goodness.
I've got a great Ron Gilbert story. I was at GDC
Hmm.
promoting our first game, and Ron was there. I think it was prior to Thimbleweed Park, to be
Hmm.
honest. I think he was just there. And we'd gone out to this great little American bar, and it was fantastic. I had the biggest, there's some photos floating around of the internet of me and Steve and Katie Hallahan from Phoenix Online with these massive beers that were like, trying to get this in the camera, but like this big, like the size of my head. And anyway, I'd had a few in me, and Ron Gilbert's there, and I just had that liquid courage, that amber courage in me, and just went up and had this great conversation. Just the nicest guy, willing to talk about anything about these games that he did 1,000 years ago. That it's just fantastic. Signed an autograph for me, and I was probably on that verge of being a bit, fanboy. Nah, I wasn't on the verge. I was way over the cliff by that stage. Real fanboy. But that was honestly, it was brilliant. It's just great to. It's a great night anyway, but it was great to see him there, just out there with the fans because they were fans, and that's why he was there. So yeah, great guy.
Just living everything that you wanted. The reason why you got into games is probably was just sitting
Yep.
right there drinking a beer with you. Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yes.
So as we mentioned, we when we were children, we loved adventure games. When we got older, we love adventure games. However,
Yep.
towards the late 90s, sales started dipping, and no one could
Mm-hmm.
say otherwise. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we believe was the reason for that. And so,
Mm.
I will say that it has to do with platforms were coming out, innovation, different types of games that we have had access to at
Yep.
the time. When adventure games were at its heyday, we had computers, and you had, I don't know, flight simulators. Adventure games was kind of
Mm.
where it was at.
That was
Then
it. Yeah.
sales started dying. I think there was a lot of corners that were being cut towards the end,
Mm.
and I
Yep.
think that was a lot of the main reasons as to that. You keep going. I'm gonna have to kick some bots out of the out of the YouTube here.
Okay.
So, what's your
Yeah.
theory on that?
Um. Okay. Well, maybe I want to pull you up on your first point that I actually disagree with, which
Okay.
is that it did sales drop.
Hmm.
That's the question I want to ask
Well,
because
I think you know the answer because you just loaded it.
what's the biggest what's the biggest selling Sierra game? Adventure game is
Steam.
Phantasmagoria.
Oh,
Sold
okay.
about 1 million copies.
Sure.
The
And it
first
also
million
cost a
seller.
fortune to
Yeah.
make. Yeah.
What? Yeah, yeah. I think there's a couple of reasons, and I think the first thing that'll tie in. I hadn't considered consoles actually.
Hmm.
That's a really good point. I think there's a splintering of the market.
Hmm.
I think the fact that Sierra folded and LucasArts sort of stopped making adventure games, they're the two big developers, and they're suddenly gone. You can't just walk into the shop and see your row of Sierra games.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm a Sierra fanboy, so that's what I looked for. I can't just see the row of Sierra games and go, oh, here's the latest, and grab it. It's now suddenly, um, you know, so many companies out there doing it. And so you don't really know where to look. So I think if there is a drop in sales, I think it's because it's harder. The market's now a dozen different people, different groups making the games. It's
Hmm.
not just the big two. Um, I
So
think you
competition.
said,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Um, and the big guys are gone. It's not like little guys coming up and challenging the big guys. The big guys are gone. They're not doing it. I think home computers went from, this is something Roberta Williams said in an interview many, many years ago. Home computers went from being a niche product in houses
Mm-hmm.
for a certain demographic, which probably to be sexist is, um, you know, teens to young adult males as predominantly. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but whatever, it was a smaller market with them,
Sure.
and then suddenly they became a white good in every house. Out in Australia, Harvey Norman, your Walmarts start selling them. So the user base increased exponentially. I don't know if adventure games started selling less or they just started looking like they sell less because you've got Halo out there selling 6 million copies
Mm-hmm.
and adventure games are still selling 1 million or less. A hit for Sierra was 100,000 copies.
Right. So,
Um, and that's nothing nowadays. I mean, indie games.
sure.
I'm sure that some of Dave Gilbert's older games are probably getting close to those sorts of numbers now. Some of the early Blackwells or whatever. But nowadays you're looking at, Halo in 2001 sold 5.5 million copies. A couple of years previous, Phantasmagoria only sold 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. Minecraft is the top selling game today, 30 million copies. Diablo 3, 20 million. Witcher 3, 12 million. They're the numbers we look at today. They're not the numbers adventure games ever did.
So your argument is that it didn't sell any less, but however, there was different types of games that were creating more of a that was limiting the market share, and because of
Yeah.
that, the developers such as LucasArts and Sierra either pivoted or folded up. So I mean,
Yeah.
so let me ask you, why do you think that LucasArts shifted and went towards like Star Wars games and all of that? Just because they were
Oh, look,
chasing the cash?
look. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
they are a business at the end of the day.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
That's they have to make money or people don't have jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars is huge.
Sure.
I mean, if I was Lucas, I would have made it Star Wars adventure games from
Oh
year dot.
yeah.
How cool would that be
Why did
to
they
have some of those
not?
Ron Gilbert, Dave Grossman, you know,
Love to see what they could do
wow.
with some Han Solo stories. I mean, that seems like a
Yeah.
really interesting way of going about like an adventure guy. I'd like to follow a protagonist like Han Solo. You had Indiana
Yeah.
Jones. You know that they were thinking
Yeah.
about capitalizing on those great IPs.
Yeah.
Why not Han
They
Solo?
they
Mm-hmm.
exactly, they
Mm-hmm.
own that stuff. So, I mean, Fate of Atlantis is one of the best adventure games out there, and
Sure.
it's an IP.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think there's money issues involved. Shooters traditionally are a lot cheaper
Mm-hmm.
to make because they're reusable assets. There's no reusable assets really in adventure games. Everything is unique. That's why you try to fit so much content into the one screen, into the one room or whatever, whichever way, it's a 3D or 2D or whatever. But you try to fit so much content in there,
Mm-hmm.
and because you want to, if you start reusing your assets, it starts looking cheap. Whereas,
So for those of us who don't make games,
yeah,
by assets, are you talking about models?
yeah,
I'll,
mm,
you just
y-
recycling them essentially.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
graphics.
Mm-hmm.
So you're okay. Think of, I don't know, any particular Call of Duty game, for
Mm-hmm.
example. You've got your soldiers. Maybe you got your German soldiers coming in over the horizon that you're mowing down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, how many character models are there for them? One or two, probably. Maybe different.
Moderate variations,
Probably
but yeah.
one model
Mm-hmm.
and a few different skins, a few
Mm-hmm.
different graphic textures over the top to make them look different. But that's a lot easier than, say, um, I don't know, what's an example? King's Quest, where you've got one King Graham, because it's a story. You've only got one character, you've only got one queen, you've only got one prince, you've only got one bad guy. And so each of those has to be uniquely modeled or drawn in those days. Because those old games are basically made in the same style you would make a cartoon, background, animations, transpose it on top of each other. So I think there's a cost factor involved that it was easier for LucasArts probably to pivot towards doing that sort of stuff, flight simulators, all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You play X-Wing, you're coming up against TIE fighters in X-Wing. It's the same TIE fighter, really. You know, it's a squadron of 6 TIE fighters you're coming up against, but it's the same one graphically.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same sound effects for each of them.
Don't have to do voices in many of these shooter type of games or space simulators. Very little at very least.
Yeah, yeah,
I can see where you're at.
exactly.
So I think we can both admit, though, however, that the adventure game genre took a lull, very much of a lull at the late '90s, and so,
Yep,
however, it's been climbing out. But I just want to cover
yeah,
one more aspect that I believe is
yep,
a real factor when it comes down to the lull.
yeah,
Is I think a lot of the developers, like I mentioned, started cutting the course. The games just weren't as good, or they tried to
yeah,
evolve too quickly. It became more of a budget to create like a Grim
mm,
Fandango or Escape from Monkey Island. Who I truly do
yep,
believe that those two of those games, which were at the time not a commercial success, and it cost so
yeah,
much more to go in the 3D direction.
yeah,
The games weren't that great. I mean, Grim
yeah,
Fandango was amazing, like
mm,
for what it is, but it was more difficult to play. And we got to a
yeah,
point, especially like Escape from Monkey Island, you have to cycle through all of your inventory. We're used to pointing, we're
mm,
used to clicking, and
yeah,
we're end up paying more for these games. And so
mm,
it became what I believe to be something that they just didn't want to follow. And then once the leader stopped or closed doors or pivoted or something, then
yeah,
all of the smaller ones or many of the smaller ones like, whoa, well, instead of just capitalizing on what they had already done, like for instance, later on you have the Dave Gilberts, and you have, like we mentioned, Francisco Gonzalez's, who came
mm,
up and started redoing, or people like yourself who
yep,
has reinvigorated
yeah,
the market. The genre is starting on a climb. Would you believe that it's
yeah.
a climb again?
Oh yeah, absolutely, definitely. Um, I, I don't know if it died. A lot of people say, "Oh, it just completely died at the end of the '90s, early
Right.
2000s." I don't really believe that, but it certainly went into a lull.
Mm-hmm.
I would go to take your point that you were saying. I think it's actually about innovation. You think adventure games used to be the innovator; they're always the ones pushing the technology, and by
Mm-hmm.
the late '90s, they're playing catch up. They're
Oh,
trying to get into 3D that everything else had been in for 5 years.
how they can incorporate what was already
Yeah.
successful into
Mm.
something the
Yeah.
future of what they considered adventure
Yeah.
games were.
Or, oh, look, Myst sold 5 million copies. Let's all just duplicate that instead of being original.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to answer your question of do I think they're invigorated today, I think it's because we've gone back to not caring what other people are doing to a great extent and just telling good stories. You look at Dave's games, Dave Gilbert's games, his Blackwell games,
Mm-hmm.
they're great stories.
Original
And that's
IPs.
what
He just like.
original
Mm-hmm.
ideas and
Mm-hmm.
yeah. He
So,
took what worked and did it better.
in having the fortitude to
Mm,
just say, look, we know what works. We
mm,
know a lot of people have gone away from it. However, I loved that game. If that type of
yeah,
game that I played in the mid 90s was out right now, I'd play it. Why don't we take that? We have the engines that are at our disposal.
yep,
It's not going to cost as much as it would cost to make, a very
mm,
expensive style game that the games have gone to now. Add a little
yeah,
makeup, a little lipstick and stuff. Had to put a great story in there. And
yep,
just, what? I put my money, my time in it, see where it goes.
yeah.
And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So, where do
It's
you think?
it's.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say I think it's the indie market as well.
Mm-hmm.
The platforms. I mean, these are boring answers. They're not the creative answers, but I think there's a lot of the factor is the fact that Steam is easy to get onto and people are able to download digitally.
Yes.
That's your big thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
gone from needing a physical office my games are made. Sat down. Steve lives in New York. I live in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a 14-hour time difference between you and me right now, and um, we don't have to work together. We sat down together 3 times maybe in Quest for Infamy,
Mm-hmm.
physically in the same room, around conventions and bars and that sort of thing. So you don't have to do that anymore. Um, you know, Wadjadai, Dave Gilbert's artist, lives in Australia. He's an Aussie like me, so he's on the other side of the country. But you don't have to be in the same room, and the cost then is lower. The entry cost to the market is lower, and once you start getting a good name, and I keep using Wadjadai as an example. Once you get a good name and you're developing consistently good games, you get that roll on like Sierra did.
Mm-hmm.
Dave's got that to a point. He's got his company to a point now where people buy the game on his name. Exactly how people used to walk into a shop and go, "There's a new Sierra adventure. I'll take that."
It's kind of
I did that with Freddie Farkas. I knew nothing about Freddie Farkas. I saw it on the shelf. I saw Al Lowe's name on it,
gotta buy it.
and I grabbed it and bought it. And it's one of my favorite games of all time. But
It's kind of like
yeah,
old money. So you put
mm,
in the work, you build up your in this case, we build up your reputation or something. Eventually,
mm,
money starts coming to you. You don't have to go out and try to search to make the money. And Dave's in one of those situations now to where
yeah,
he's producing all of these a
mm,
lot of these great games, and
yeah.
he's put his name in the industry. I think
That's right.
another thing
Yeah,
that really helped is having the ability to have options such as Kickstarter
yeah,
to finance. First, as we mentioned, it's not as expensive anymore to have to create the games because you don't have the physical
mm,
copies, or most of the time you don't
yeah,
have physical copies. So now you don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars up front.
mm.
Unless you're Space Venture, but
No comment.
so you got Kickstarter coming in here, and
Yeah.
they've opened up the path now to all of these
Mm.
wonderful fans of games who, like yourself, want to make some games. Now
Yep.
they don't have the cash. Help us out a little
Yep.
bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Look,
another,
we kickstarted our games,
mhm,
and I've got good and bad stories about Kickstarter, but at the end of the day, um, it's fans putting their money where their mouth is and saying, "We want this game. We think
sure,
it'll be good," and it's allowed a lot of people. It's allowed a lot of games to be made. It allowed my book to be made. It allowed me to,
hmm
get an editor and someone, well, Jack,
hmm
you know, our colleague Jack Allen. He did the editing of the book, with some help from Emily McGarty as well. But Jack did the editing of the book, and he's a professional in that area. So
hmm
you pay people what they're worth, and these things cost money. So um, and things like layout and all of that sort of stuff, I was able to do that, and it's the same with the games. It's just allows people to make the games. I think where people go wrong with Kickstarters is they get much more interested in the swag and the physical stuff,
the
and that just
feelings.
kills you. But
Yeah, and
for
I
me,
could
it's
see
about
that.
the product. Yeah, but
Another
that's
thing,
a different story.
another thing that I think helps nowadays is it's gone back in most cases. I can't say all cases, but I believe in most cases it's gone back to for it to be a passion project again, because it seems
Yeah.
like they are the fans again that are making these games. I keep we keep coming up with
Mm,
Francisco Gonzalez, Dave Gilbert, people like
yeah.
yourself. it's
Yeah.
it's something important to them.
Mm,
The
yeah.
story is important to them.
Yeah.
We're not churning out games like a lot of these old developers, and in many cases, I'd say that Sierra eventually it just became more of a business, or churning things out. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
chasing in some like they started chasing like the Lighthouse. They were following
Mm,
Mist and that type of a
yep.
thing.
Yep. Yep.
But a lot of these games, it's like truly from their hearts.
Yeah.
They're good games.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, they have to be good. They have to be great stories because they're not all of them are very high end, like Pendulo Studios type of graphics and
Yeah.
everything.
Yep.
So
Yeah. It's it, look for us. I mean, one of the things that we loved pixel art,
hmm
what we now call pixel art, which is that '90s look,
hmm
and that emulating that 256 color look, and yes, there's cost reasons involved in that as well, but we realize that if the story's not there, people are going to concentrate on then the graphics or the music or the voice acting and
hmm
things like that. It's got to be held together by the story, and it's got to be engaging, and it's got to be interesting. I mean, I love, um, or the world has to be interesting. Like Lamplight City, the world is fantastic. It is so deep. It is so rich.
hmm
So there's so many great games out there now that are indie games, but it's about just you can feel the heart and the passion. Like this is a story that has to be told, and I have to tell this story, and you can feel that passion from the designer, developer, whatever, come out when you're playing it on the screen.
Isn't it kind of funny or ironic that
Mm.
back in those days, the 256, colors and all that, like people were
Mm.
trying to get away from pixels. They were trying to
Yeah.
hide the fact that it was pixels. Now we're trying to
Yes.
go backwards. Like we're trying to
Yep.
make them look overtly pixelated.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
It's funny. It's nostalgia, honestly.
hmm
Um,
Chasing
you
exactly
know,
chasing a drug.
it,
hmm
yeah, exactly. It's nostalgia. I make games like that because that's what I grew up with and that's what I like.
That's what you love.
And that's the truth for me, and I'm sure other people are the same. And yeah, there's all the money excuses and reasons and all of that sort of stuff. But really, bottom line, if I wanted to do a 3D game, I would work out a way to do it. I just don't really have much interest in it. So,
Well, we have a lot of people inside the chat
yeah,
that has been talking about the resurgence of the adventure games. You got just want to. Cabri is making all sorts of incredible points in here. I wish I had time or the ability to read them all out. Slat Studios in there saying that Kickstarters helped as well. It's quite a few. So thank you guys so
yeah.
much for watching live. So
Mm.
if anybody listens to my radio show or if they ever watch any of my podcasts or anything like that, they know that we finish our show by doing a top 5 of something. So why don't you introduce what the top 5 is that we're going to be doing today, Shawn?
Top 5 favorite sidekicks in
Okay.
adventure games. I think that's it's a great idea. There's so many. Actually, you know what? When you gave me when we were talking about the ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
I thought to myself, oh, sidekicks. I can only think of one. And I sat there for ages thinking, how many? But yeah, I ended up coming up with a pretty good list, I think. So, um, yeah, because they're
So
the conduit. Sometimes the sidekick is the conduit between the game and the player, explaining
what's going
it's
on?
the
Yes.
old. It's they say this about Doctor Who. The Doctor Who companion is there to say, "Oh, Doctor, what's this about?" to explain it to the viewer. And I think sometimes that's the case with companions or sidekicks or whatever in games as well. So
As an
yeah,
avid book reader, I always
yep,
say the protagonist will lead the book. You'll keep reading the book because you like this protagonist, but
yeah,
you won't keep reading it if it doesn't have some sort of sidekick that kind of keeps things light. If you have somebody who's heavy-handed, you want like somebody who
yep,
has like a little whimsical aspect to him, that kind of keeps flowing. And there are some great ones in the
yeah.
adventure game genre. So you're the guest. I'm gonna let you go first. You choose first.
Okay,
You,
I'm gonna go with Joey from the Blackwell games.
okay.
Um, I I just think it's unique for starters. A ghost, the
That
able
New
to
York
use
ghost.
her in different ways. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just think it's really unique. I think it's really good, and the relationship between the characters then just grows and blossoms over the 4 or 5 games. So I think that's probably my number one.
I like it. I like it. So, I guess we should set the ground rules here.
Yeah.
Are we actually doing 5 to 1, 1 to 5, or we're just going to throw five? No order.
Oh,
I,
let's just throw
let's
five
throw
because
them.
I'm terrible at ranking things.
Throw them. Okay.
It'll change between now and 20 minutes time. You're like, no, actually, I like this one. Whichever one I'm talking about at the time is my favorite. So,
Okay. So with that in mind, you said Joey from the Blackwell series. I'm going to say Joey
yep,
from Beneath the Still Sky. Not so much Beyond the Still Sky, but I love his
yeah,
his humor. I love the fact that that story is so serious, but there's always a
yeah,
wisecrack coming in from Joey that just keeps it fresh. The dialogue that he has
yes,
is
yep,
incredible, especially in Beneath the Still
yeah,
Sky.
yeah.
And
Well, you've stolen one of mine there.
well, apparently Cabri as well inside the chat agrees with Joey from Beneath the Still Skies. So,
Beautiful.
well,
Good, good.
if that's in your top five, you could throw that too. We're not like stealing them from each other.
Yeah. No, no, I'm throwing that one as well. For exactly the same reasons as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's a serious protagonist, and it just adds humor, which is so important. But not over the top, just enough to not break the game, not break the mood,
Mm-hmm.
but it keeps you, it keeps, yeah, it's just enough to lighten it, just enough that you're able to continue. I think they're great. Yeah.
So you're gonna
Uh,
choose is that's on your list then as well then.
That's on my list as well.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you got two
absolutely.
down. Why don't you give us another one though, so that we're not stumbling over
Uh,
each other?
yeah, yeah. Okay. Clementine, Walking Dead, season one.
Gotcha.
Now, I realize that she's a playable character in later seasons, so that might be a bit of a controversial choice. But
Mm-hmm.
what's what are adventure game fans except being controversial? Um, I love that relationship between the main character and Clementine, finding her and falling in love with her as his surrogate daughter almost. And I think Walking Dead season one is one of the greatest adventure games ever, and I just think that relationship and the fact that character gave me the emotions of wanting to protect her. It
So
was
it's
so well
she's a
written.
well-written character, and
Yeah,
people are
yeah.
agreeing with you in the chat. So I think we can bring in those type of characters. I mean, like you mentioned,
Mm,
even if they are a playable character, that's if they're not the
yeah.
primaries. You know
Mm,
what? Let's
yeah,
let's.
yeah,
I'm gonna bring in definitely not a sidekick,
yeah.
but an accompanying character throughout a very popular game series. I'm gonna go with Murray from Monkey Island series.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes.
Just, I mean, like, what else can we say about Murray that he
Yeah,
hasn't already said himself?
yeah.
The one of the
No,
best lines in adventure games. Can you pick me
yeah.
up so I can bite you?
Yes. Oh, yes. I love that. I used to have that on a sticker on my old computer, on my old Amstrad
Yes.
computer. I had that as a printed sticker. I don't know where I got it, but um, yeah, I love it. Absolutely brilliant.
All right, we're
Good
back to
choice.
you.
Monkey Island, always a good choice.
Actually, I'll go. I'll go again since we're kind of going
Yeah,
in like snake pattern here.
sure.
So I'm gonna go with my third since you've given
Yeah,
three.
yeah.
I'm gonna go with Flux from
Okay,
Toonstruck. And not just because
okay.
it's my branding, my logo. While I do
Yeah,
appreciate them allowing me to use as my branding, the character himself,
yeah,
he's annoying.
yeah,
However, like I absolutely loved him in Toonstruck. Did,
yeah.
did you play it?
Mm.
You play so
I don't think I've finished it, but I have played it. Yeah,
oh
yeah,
man, he is exactly what we were talking about. Somebody who kind of makes the game continue on due to him having his little
yeah,
comical saying in it. Everything he has something to say, and he's just cool. He looks
yeah.
cool. I love the color
Yes,
palette on that character. So
yes,
Flux from Toonstruck.
absolutely. Yeah.
Now you got
Oh,
two
good
more.
choice. You got me thinking. Oh, look, I'm gonna go. Based on your podcast last week with Jack, and we talked about action adventure games.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Sully. This will tell you where I fall on that. I'm going to go with Sully in the Uncharted games because that humor that he injects into it in what are very serious, tense Indiana Jones type situations.
Mm-hmm.
And when he's there, there's that humor, but there's also that fatherly figure, but not maybe the cool uncle figure, maybe is a better way of describing him. I just think he brings to the story, and again, that humor. He's got a quip, he's got a line, he will call Nathan Drake out when he has to be called out, but in a way that is not annoying or anything like that. It's just like it develops, it advances the story, but he's there and he humanizes he humanizes Nathan, but also it's just a fun character.
Mm-hmm.
I just think he's a fun character. So yeah, Sully.
Now, I don't know why, but I get Far Cry and
Oh
that
yeah.
that game mixed up. I don't know what it is. Now, I've come to the realization that I have not played any of those games. And
Ooh.
so
Okay.
yeah, that's definitely something that I've got to try. I mean, a lot of people have recommended them. Now, have
Mm.
you seen the movie?
No, actually,
Okay.
it's my kids are right into it, but I haven't watched it yet.
Very
I don't
enjoyable.
know. I've never seen a good um movie based off a video game. I don't think so. You
Well,
know,
I was going to say
I'm like,
that exact same thing. That's
uh,
not something you will say, "Oh, video game movie, gotta see it."
yeah.
That was a very entertaining movie. So,
Okay. Good.
yeah,
Oh,
definitely,
yeah.
definitely give you that. So you have one more.
One more.
Hmm.
I'm gonna. This is gonna get some old school fans talking. I think one of the best sidekick characters in adventure games is Cedric the Owl in King's Quest V. I know the hate that he gets. I think it's completely unfounded and uncalled for.
He does.
King's Quest,
He's just a meme now. Like
it is. It is.
hmm.
Look, King's Quest is a family game.
Yeah.
They are family games. They are not, they're not Gabriel Knight. They're not highfalutin, intellectual games. They are family fairy tales.
Hmm.
And Cedric is the bridge between adults and kids. Cedric is really well used. I'm not looking at the comments because I don't have them up, but I'm sure I can imagine what they're saying. But I just think, look, particularly in that first area of Serenia, you click, look, or talk. You click your talk icon on Cedric, and he will tell you something about the surrounding screens.
Hmm.
He is an inbuilt hint system. A
He's a
lot of
hit
people don't
system.
realize that.
That's popular
And,
in Sierra games that you don't realize. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think he is really well done. I think he's really well acted. I think I just think he's great. I think he is exactly what that game needs. I wouldn't make a game like that, really. I say that I've made one, but um, I prefer something a bit more adult and a bit more mature than that. But for what that game is, that character is absolutely essential. It's a bit of a darker storyline. The family's been kidnapped, evil wizards, and all of that sort of stuff. And Graham's in a bit of despair, even though he's the stoic King Graham type thing.
Well,
And it
his
just
castle's been repoed.
balances. Yeah, exactly. That awesome little swirly animation. Yeah. I particularly love that game, but I just think Cedric. I think that is one of the best sidekick characters in adventure games.
I was actually going to say Cedric as well,
Okay.
and I totally was for different reasons because I wanted to
Yeah.
be a contrarian and piss people off.
Yep.
But
Yep.
like in reality, for many of the reasons that you mentioned, he was a very important sidekick. You like when you think of a sidekick, you want them to be helpful, and
Yeah.
Cedric was. So let's do this. Let's take what we hear from him and just okay, the poisonous thing. It sounds a little silly. Okay, I take that
Yeah.
out. He sounds silly.
Yeah.
If it was
Yeah.
just a dialogue box like it had been prior to King's Quest V, you see an owl
Yep.
that says, "Look out, Graham, a poisonous snake." Like, okay,
Yep.
well, thank you very much. I'll look out for that.
Mm.
But now
Yep.
we hear him, and
Yeah.
you got to give him a little bit of extra credit for the era that he was made. That was like the first game where there was voices. They were
That's
still
right.
figuring
Yeah.
that stuff out. You know what I mean? It's
They built their own little studio
Mhm.
inside the Sierra offices. That's where they recorded it all. So it's the first voiced adventure game. It's so historically you've got to look at it like that. But I
Mhm.
just think as a character, look, maybe I'm biased a bit towards him because I didn't play the talkie version for years. I played the
Mhm.
first release. That's the one I had, which was the
Gotcha.
non-speaking version.
Mhm.
So maybe I had that going for me in that case. But I remember sitting at that like do not enter the evil forest, and
Mhm.
he says I'm not going in there. It's dangerous. There's a witch in there. That tells me I need, that warned me off going in there until I was ready.
I'm not
That's what
trying to
he's
be a
supposed to
frog.
do.
I'm not trying to be a
Yeah,
frog. Yeah, so
yeah.
that was one of them, and I guess I'm gonna choose. I don't remember the name of this character, like Boodles or something. The sidekick from Torn's Passage. For the same
Oh
reason that I
yes.
mentioned Cedric was helpful. Now that
Mm,
sidekick was the epitome of helpful. You turn
yeah.
him into anything you want. He would transform into anything that you need. He had a little
Yep.
interesting little look to him. He was, especially as a young man when I was like 10 or something when that came out. I loved that. He looked so cool.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so there you go. That's our
Yeah.
5 sidekicks. Our
Uh-huh.
top 5 sidekicks from adventure
Beauty.
games. This
And
was
we
fun,
agreed on
Shawn.
2. That's awesome.
We probably would have agreed on more if it kept on going. So
Yeah.
I think we wanted to have our own little distinctions on some of them. We always got to have a little bit
Mm.
of that. And so, but
Oh, I needed some controversy.
well, there you go. There you go. We'll see if people have any controversy for us. Actually, there was half of the audience agreed with it, and so
Okay.
it gets a bad rap.
Sweet.
So
Good. Maybe we can change the public perception of Cedric the Owl.
one podcast at a time.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's the end of this podcast. So we're going to close this up a little bit and just say that this has been a wonderful first week for Adventure Game Hotspot. We've had way more views on the website than we could have ever dreamed of, and so excited. It was such a fun event that we had. We have our own YouTube channel that just created. We're going to have all the interviews that we had from that 12-hour podcast and break them up individually to make it easily consumed that way. So we'll be having an announcement saying, run over there, subscribe so you can see all that eventually, but not quite ready at the moment. But this was a wonderful show. I enjoyed the time that I've had with you. This is the second time that I've got to hang out with you, and an absolute pleasure as always. Where can we find you, Shawn?
You can find me on Twitter, Shawn Mills 100, or just follow me on Adventure Game Hotspot. I've got a couple of reviews up there now. I think I've got the most reviews. I think out of all our reviews, I've got 2 of mine are up there now. So
Oh, what was the first one? Did I miss it? What was the first
yeah, it was the Doctor Who game, the Weeping
Okay.
Angels one. What's it called? Lonely Assassins, maybe.
So
Something
you
like
did
that.
that's one that you had
Yeah.
done quite a while before the site actually started yet. That's why I'd already read it before it went live.
Yeah.
That was
Yep.
you.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that was me. That was one of mine. Yeah.
And you just did the
So
Space Venture one, which seems to be very
that's venture.
popular at the moment. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's quite a fun game. Got some issues, but quite a fun game. So it's enjoyable actually getting back into the action and writing those reviews. So yeah, but you can follow me, Sierra Adventure, on Facebook, Twitter, the Instagram, all that stuff.
so we have somebody
Either
who
the
wanted to
Sierra
know your
Adventure.
Twitter
Yeah.
again. What was your Twitter
It's
again?
Shawn Mills 100.
Shawn Mills 100. And this is Adventure Game Hotspot, the podcast. For Shawn, I am Joshua. We love you guys. Like, truly. In a non-weird way. We love you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys in the next podcast. Take care, everybody.